Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Strength Minor Presents Intercultural Conversations, where we talk about how culture affects everything and everything affects culture. It's 2025, and clearly things are different. Actually, this year marks the third year that I started Intercultural Conversations, and what started as just an Instagram live series has now evolved to what it is today. And to celebrate this, I wanted to talk about something that's that's a very integral part of me being a behavioral trainer and an intercultural practitioner. And I didn't know that this concept was actually so important till I was reading this book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Paka. And that's when I realized that this concept, or this subject rather, of our conversation today is often what determines the outcome of any of my interactions or trainings. And that outcome is either positive or negative based on my capability of holding space. And holding space is what we're going to talk about today. Some of you may know what it means to hold space, and for others, I'm sure it just feels like a random combination of words. Honestly, there is no real definition to it, but if I have to describe it, I would say it's my capability of creating an environment where people or an individual is okay feeling vulnerable and expressing themselves and expressing the best and the not so good part of themselves. And usually these create such defining experiences for people and can be very impactful when you're not only interacting with your peers or your family and friends, but also with your coworkers. And if you're a leader, also holding space for your team members becomes so important. And I feel as a collective, we are going through so much. And as a collective, we've been through a lot in the past few years as well. And it just felt so imperative that I talk about how we can hold space not only for others, but for ourselves too. So I hope you find the conversation insightful. And today I will be joined by Lily Kelting. Lily Kelting has such an extensive career, so I have to read it out because I can't remember it all. So I apologize for that. Lily Kelting is an assistant professor of literary and cultural studies at the Flame University in Pune, India. She is currently writing an academic book about the revival of heritage foods around the world, interweaving examples from the US South, the Nordic region, and Western India. Her work has been published in Food, Culture and Society, Southern Quarterly, and Paragrana. She is a former and now an occasional theatre critique, magazine editor, radio journalist, freelance writer, and a mother of twins. She has been an arts and culture reporter for NPR Berlin, editor and dance critique for Tanz im August, stage editor and theatre critique for Ex-Berliner magazine. And the reason I thought Lily would be the perfect person to talk about this subject is because she has been a critique of the theater. She's an observer and researcher of theater as well. So she has seen performers capture and convince and hold space for audiences. So through our conversation, we talk about strategies of how you and I can apply those same concepts of holding space in our personal and our professional lives. So I hope you find this conversation insightful. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Lily. I'm so grateful to you that you're here to have a conversation on the third year anniversary of Intercultural Conversations. And I thought you would be the best guest to start the season with. So thank you so much for being here.
Congratulations on your anniversary. That is so exciting.
Thank
and I'm
you so
really
much.
looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. So let's dive right into it. In the introduction, I was talking about what holding space means for me. And honestly, there's no clear definition, I believe. But if I had to define it, it would be my ability to create an environment where a person or a group of people feel vulnerable enough to express themselves fully. And by express themselves fully, I mean in their best and in not their best also. So I feel like each person, especially a facilitator, has their own definition what holding space is. I was just wondering for you, what does that mean? What does holding space mean?
I love this question because it is a word or a phrase that I say a lot. And sometimes I think I use it kind of casually and I'm not really sure what I mean when I'm like, I want to hold space for this. Like, what is that?
Exactly, yeah.
And I think often for me, obviously it is about this idea of creating a safe space or a container that feels bounded, you know, in a way that feels secure because it's not going to like leak out. But also I think sometimes when I say I want to hold space for something, what I mean is I also want to do it in a state of awareness. Like I might want to not only hold space in the sense of creating a space within which to do a workshop or activity or something, but I also want to hold space for people or experiences that might otherwise be left out. So that's something I think about a lot too, where I'll say I want to hold space. I think I want to bring a level of awareness to this space, like an awareness of bad things, an awareness of different experiences that people might have had or be having. Or I think often holding space is about, allowing maybe.
Allowing, yeah, that's true. And, you know, you are a theater critic as well. So you may look at performances through a lens that is way different than mine, let's say. And you look at actors and the way they can captivate an audience and hold space for an audience. But speaking of actors, it does remind me, I was talking to a friend once and I was really frustrated. I said that my life feels like a great act. Yeah, in every context, I am so different. And it sometimes then feels inauthentic because I'm at home, I'm different. In a professional setting, I'm different. You know, in a social setting, I'm different. And that feels somehow inauthentic. And she completely changed my perspective. She said, everybody's playing roles. It's what role you play given the context. Yeah, so contextually, you need to play the right role. And I think that gave me so much more power to be in my space when I'm entering into different rooms. So since we're all actors, I wanted to know, in your perspective, the difference between a good performance and a bad performance on stage. Is it the ability of the actor to hold that space of the audience?
That's very interesting. I thought you were going to ask about like how life is all performance, and you know what you were. So yeah, I mean, wow, I have so many thoughts and responses. Okay, so the first thing is what makes an effective performance. For me personally, I think it's a level of emotional truth, and maybe political consciousness, and maybe a good story, you know? I think in all the performances that I watched when I was working as a professional critic, and the things that really grabbed me were things that felt really emotionally true. And again, I think like aware or vulnerable. I think those are the two things that I'm really interested in, is like things that felt aware of themselves, not in like a too clever by half way, but just aware of the situation, aware of what was going on, aware of the audience in the room in some sense. So that to me is good performance. Good performance is emotionally true and somehow, trying to do something, aware of something. But I love your point. I mean, this is something that I teach. You know, my PhD is in performance studies. So this is the basic idea of the field of performance studies. You've summed it up, right? It's like you can either talk about things that are performance, or you can talk about things as performance. And so there are things that are performance, like a theater performance, a dance performance. And then you can go a little further to be like a music performance, or even you could say, oh, this cricket match is actually kind of a performance, or war, you know, it's like there's a theater of war and we see there's staging in some sense. So we could even think about like weirder things as performance. But then it goes even further to identity, where it's like no one is the same everywhere they go, right? No. I mean, so identity is performative. I mean, that's like one of the big ideas in cultural studies is, you know, that we're all performing all the time. And, you know, it can feel inauthentic. And obviously we want to behave in integrity, right? Like this is not a license to act out of alignment with your personal values or cultural values. But, that's just kind of how it is, right? And something I was talking about with my students this week is with social media, especially, and even if there's no one around, right? So even if you're not going to post it to Instagram, or even if you're not doing it in front of another person, you're totally alone, still all the students and I were all kind of experiencing that we're imagining an audience. So even if it's to ourselves, we're always imagining an audience. So in that sense, we're always performing. Even someone was like, well, what about getting ready in the morning? And I was like, well, that's obvious because I watch Get Ready With Me videos. I love Get Ready With Me videos. So we are performing. So even if you're not filming a Get Ready With Me video, that genre exists. And so we are thinking as we prepare ourselves for the world, like, how is it going to be today? And you're imagining a social situation, even if you're not in a social situation. So I love this story with your friend because it's true. Then it just becomes about, how can I be more aware of the choices that I'm making, right? Like if I'm constantly performing, then can I take back maybe some agency over those performances?
And it's so different contextually speaking also, and that's what sometimes makes me feel safe as well, playing a certain role in a certain way. But I was just wondering, since you are a critique of the theater and you see actors and you see performers, is there a way in which they hold space? Because you did mention emotions, you did mention it feels emotionally true. That's there as well. I think that's one of many times the most effective trainings and the most effective communications that I've had is when it felt very emotionally true to myself. It felt authentic. But I was wondering, how can leaders or, managers or people in their day-to-day lives, even with their coworkers and peers, use a technique maybe of how they can hold space?
Yeah, so in that sense, maybe it's more of a question of the theater directors and the way that the theater directors are creating an experience, because that's something that leaders are doing all the time, right? Is they're actually they're like theater directors, but the play that they're directing is their team or the project or whatever it is. And so, facilitators and leaders can absolutely change theatrical things about their space, right? They can organize the chairs in a certain way. They can refuse not to be in a circle. They can put themselves at the same physical level as their team. This is something I think a lot about, it's like, where am I physically in relationship to the people that I'm talking to? I have a colleague, for example, at the university who mentioned an anecdote where at one point she was sitting on the floor and she talked to a student who was standing, and we were kind of like processing this encounter. And I said, yeah, but it's quite radical, that actually someone who's a, full prof is physically lower, than her.
Especially in a cultural context, such as India, where there is already a power distance. So that even creates a further power distance, but in the opposite way. And that is a way in which you hold space. But I can imagine if I was in the place of the student, I would be so distracted. Like, should I be standing, sitting, touching feet? But yeah, and I don't know if there's anything ritualistic about it or not, but I do feel so. I hold these community events called Unity Circle, where I teach, I don't want to say teach, but I invite children from under-resourced backgrounds into a public space such as a park, and we get together, and what the moment feels like, we do that. So sometimes it's drawing, sometimes it's us just speaking, and if they're in the mood, we also, play games. But I was just trying to think if there's a pattern that existed which kind of attracted them, because sometimes it's the same children, sometimes it's children just who are at the park. And for me personally, it's been how open I am in that moment. So I'll be sitting under a tree and it'll be just a bed sheet there, which is not even big enough to accommodate everyone. It's like a picnic sheet. But what I think calls or invites them is how open I am in that moment, and how do I make myself as less intimidating as possible? I'm not saying I'm an intimidating person, but in that moment, because, there's this random lady in the park sitting with her bedsheet there. Why would I want to? But somehow it just attracts the children. It's calling them in. So, and I never know how to explain to people what it means to be open.
Yeah. Well, it's also about fun and play, right? I mean, with children, maybe that's more obvious, but even with adults, I think something that a really good teacher or facilitator or leader will have is a spirit of playfulness, right? Which just means, I think, that something could happen that you don't expect. So as opposed to this very controlled attitude of things will happen in the way that I say, you have an attitude of things will happen in an unknown way.
Yeah.
And that's playful. And I think that attitude manifests itself already. Things do happen unexpectedly when you invite unexpected things to happen,
Yes.
So if you're open, like you say, I mean, open also I think means open in terms of posture, in terms of you create a blanket with space on it, but also in terms of you're opening possibilities also, and they can somehow intuit this. I don't know, but I mean,
yes, and it's just so it's magical. Yeah, I was just wondering, how can one translate that even to a, let's say, corporate setting? How do we keep meetings in the same way where it's so free flowing, or the leaders are quote unquote open for more ideas to come in? But I hope I'm able to articulate that one day. But yeah, I don't know if you had any insights on that, of how possibly even actors remain open.
I mean, I think that it's not surprising to me, for example, that sometimes, I mean, I know in the US, I'm not sure in India if this has happened, but that improv actors will come and do corporate trainings for leadership, because you have to think on your feet. I mean, all these skills actually that an improv actor has about being in their body, being grounded in their body, being able to respond to another person, think on their feet, deal with really wild card suggestions, right? Those are skills that an actor has, and they're not necessarily skills that a corporate leader would have. So the improv, training, basic games, basic theater exercises. I mean, even the theater exercise, where there's two people facing and you do a mirror game. I mean, that's a very basic theater exercise. It's you do at theater camp when you're 7 or whatever. Yeah, so it's okay, should we do it? Is this going to be good TV? Okay, so you just face, and then you mirror. So who's going to be the mirror? You go. This is too beautiful. But do you see? So you're doing embodied listening. You're making eye contact. I mean, it's all these soft skills, right? That people are oh, I want to do soft skills training. I'm just go to theater school, because if you do mirror exercise, there's all types, right? There's other forms of you look down, you look up and make eye contact, where you're in a circle. And then if you make eye contact, you pass. And then the goal is for everyone to be constantly moving. So you're in a state of, there's a Polish theater director called Jerzy Grotowski, and he calls it conscious passivity. Like this very much. So it's leaders can also learn conscious passivity, right? You can train either by doing literally theater exercises, or maybe in other ways. But I like it so much better than saying good leaders listen. What does that mean? Listen to what? There's also a lot of noise, right? I'm not a corporate leader, but I get emails. So I know there's just a lot of information. So listen to what? I'm not meant to listen, I think, to everything. Or one, I don't know. I mean, even my my inbox, right? Not everything is so important. So I'm not meant to process, intake, I don't know, everything in the same way.
Yeah.
But I do need to learn some form of listening that feels deep, embodied, genuinely responsive, in the moment, live. I mean, these are all performance things, right? Live is performance, in the moment is performance, embodied. So that's why I think theater is a really good tool, for life, basically. It's people say their kids shouldn't study theater and performance. I'm theater and performance is everything.
And when you mean embodied, what do you mean? Like embodying it yourself?
Present in your body.
Present in your body.
I mean, I think this is a big thing, right? Like we spend so much time in our heads also, and not really even in our heads, like on our phones in that sense. So my consciousness is like all directed towards this, which affects, my posture and my neck and my sleep. And, I think there's this really common idea that it's like, oh, this meat sack, I'm just toting around my body, but like the true asset is my mind or my thoughts. And I think that embodied leadership would be literally paying attention to your body, right? Like, is this meeting right after lunch? Are we all super tired because we just had lunch? Is there anything we can do to make this meeting more active? Even including making it a standing meeting. I mean, basic, silly things, Or like, oh, everyone in this room is really hungry because it's 12:50 and we're running late and everyone knows that lunch is at 1. Like, can we be aware of that? Can you say like, like we got to break early because no one is actually really working right now. Time to go.
Yes, it's not only awareness of what is being said, but awareness of everything else, like a very holistic awareness. And in your experience, have you actually done any exercises that kind of broke the norm of how you're starting a conversation with a group of people, or in a meeting, how you're starting something, but in a very different, or I don't like to say unconventional, but in an unconventional way where you start something and people are broken almost from this unconscious pattern in the way they're used to entering into rooms and into meetings. So is there any exercises that you've done?
I wish I had more kind of like super clever answers. I mean, basic stuff is to do kind of exercises. So something that's so obvious, Prata, but I think is really important is also having people go around and learn each other's names. Sometimes I'm in a meeting and not everyone in the room is known to everyone else in the room, and they'll start the meeting without introducing people. And it makes me so mad because it goes against this liveness, right? It's like, who's actually here? We are all people. Like, can we acknowledge our shared humanity baseline before we start talking about like how we're going to revise the policy? And the baseline for me about that is like, can we do a name game? Can we just learn each other's names and not just go around and quickly say names, which no one will remember? Like, can we make an actual effort to learn each other's names? And there's a zillion name games, right? Like you could say an adjective that describes you with your name, or you could do a gesture and then everyone repeats the gesture. Then that's more embodied, right? Like if I say, I'm Lily, and then everyone has to go around and say Lily, then they'll never forget.
Yeah.
And if you're in a team with a project that lasts a year, or you're in a classroom and the class is a year, for the duration of the year, everyone is gonna give me a double thumbs up every time they see me, So I think basic things like name games, I mean, it depends on appropriateness also. Sometimes I feel, wouldn't it be so nice if we could start things with like eye contact games and stuff like that. Then I think, maybe it's too intimate. We shouldn't.
Yeah, it depends on context also and how comfortable people are. I do like to get people a little bit out of their comfort zone, not at the level of discomfort, but it helps to break that pattern. And there was this one suggestion that was given by Priya Parker in The Art of Gathering. And I believe it was a professor of arts, I guess. And every time when her session would start, the first day of the session, she would not place the chairs. She would just keep a pile of chairs in the middle and not say anything. So as and when the participants or students enter, they're very confused looking at what's happening. And then they somehow, almost telepathically come together and start arranging it the way the group as a collective wants it to be arranged. So I feel that's so much better than already having the chairs arranged. And in this case, they are already making that space, holding the space for the entire collective together. And sometimes they've not even had a conversation with each other, or not even met each other before. So I think, things like that can really, really change things, or really kind of set the context for everything. But I don't know how possible it is to apply this to corporate settings.
Yeah. But even things like, as again, basic bodily stuff, like even asking people to stand, you know, sometimes I'll ask everyone to stand and stretch a bit. I'm like, okay, welcome to class. I know you're seated. Everybody please get up. And that's so shocking because they're already like on their laptops ready, you know? So it's like to ask people to stand is even a very, I think, minimal request. It's not a big thing, but it does change the vibe in the room, you know? So it doesn't, I love this chair thing too. I remembered that from the book. It was so, made a big impression on me.
Yeah.
But it can be something
very basic also.
Like introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you. Ask the person sitting next to you what their goal is today or with this project or whatever the, you know, meeting is about.
The context feels right in that moment, But, you know, as a facilitator, holding space is just, it's part of my job, right? You hold space for teams to have difficult conversations with each other, to have, they're usually teams that are in friction. So how do you create an environment where everyone feels safe to even express that friction without any negative consequences? I mean, of course, not way, like you mentioned, not way outside the alignment of their values, but still, or the values of the organization. But it so happens that sometimes I'm in rooms with people who are very different than I am, and their life's contexts are so different. Either I'm the one who's privileged or I enter into rooms where they are more privileged and we don't have any shared context. And then that's the time it gets even more difficult for me, coming from completely different environments, of how do I hold space for them? Yeah. Do you have any suggestions, let's say, or any experiences that you've had where you've entered into rooms and been like, oh God, how do I now embody or be fully present without being distracted with all of the differences, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, I do, because I'm a white American person living in India. So every room I enter, usually I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I'm gonna now attune myself to this space. So certainly, like, living as a foreigner in another country is a great way to become very humble. It's a great way to learn how to navigate the challenges of intercultural communication. Like, that's life.
Yeah.
But it's also a really good question. And I think it has to do, again, with kind of leveling yourself at the level of the group so that you create a kind of a horizontal axis where everyone is trying to do things together more than you're the facilitator and you're kind of like up here trying to manage down. And some of that is spatial. But certainly I think that, you know, when I'm teaching, for example, that's something that I'm really conscious of. It's like, oh, wow, you know, we're going to try to have a conversation about gender. You know, like, people who are in a different generation than me, coming from a totally different background, in terms of growing up in India, not from a totally different background, maybe in terms of growing up in a big city and being kind of, in terms of their like class position, as like liberal arts college students. But yeah, I think it becomes just about really like, okay, everybody in the room is here and we're all kind of, even just in terms of eye contact, checking in with everybody, making people move their chairs so that everyone is aligned. You know, sometimes people will like physically try to kind of hide in the back and I have to say like, please sit with the group. Yeah. Which I always feel like a bit of a bully, you know. I don't like to like to make people change where they're sitting, you know. I believe that people have chosen their seat. But sometimes for the holding of space, like for the functioning of the group so that the space works, then I do have to kind of like rope people in so that they are aware that I am aware that we're all here. You know what I mean? It's like you can't escape. You can't escape.
I'm locking the door. Yeah, it's about bringing everybody to the same level. I think a good opening question as well. And like you mentioned, the seating, I think a circle for me is the best way for leveling everyone, and everyone is facing one another. And we usually, during our trainings, don't even have tables. So you're very exposed. So everyone's equally vulnerable, right, in a way, because of the physical setup of things. And I think a good check-in question always helps. And I usually don't like check-in questions like how your week went. Something more meaningful of, what made you joyful in the last week, or what's something that troubled you, or what was one of the challenges that you face in your personal life, if they're comfortable sharing, or opening up the room, the space for people to share things that are out of the group's context of gathering. I feel that really helps for people to come to one level. But yeah, it's such a struggle for me also, because especially when I was in France, like you mentioned, it really humbles you when you're not in your home country and you don't have the safety of your own country. And everything felt so new to me. And I'll often enter into rooms where either people are way older to me generationally, or are largely, white men. And there is such a mental power distance that was created. But I very specifically remember there were people who made me feel comfortable. Yeah, they made me either feel comfortable by being very open of things they were not aware of, and the value that I bought. So I think things like that really shift dynamics. If you show the person the value that they bring, it immediately makes space to hold space.
Yeah, it makes the space bigger, because then that person is actually included as opposed to kind of just there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think there's a big difference between being kind of present, like attending something, versus, being kind of in the space, or in, I don't know how to describe it, but I think you can tell when you're in a situation that's like activated, and it's not just like a bunch of people in a room, but something is happening. That's why I really love performance and performance studies, I have to say, because like that magic that you describe, for me,
is the electricity.
It's like something with theater. Like there's something like, oh, we're not in regular life. Like now something is happening. Like we put out the blanket, there's a bunch of strangers, and we're gonna play, and who knows what's gonna happen. And like, to me, that magic and that electricity is amazing. Like that's everything, right? So I like never want to be in charge of a space that just feels like a bunch of warm bodies kind of in a room listening to me talk, or not listening to me. I mean, in that situation, probably not even listening, right? It's like, I don't just want to be like together in a room. I'm hoping that we can kind of do something. So that's why I do think when I do check-ins, it's usually about, the purpose of the gathering. Although I do think that would be harder if it's like, we're going to share our quarterly report earnings or whatever. And it's not like, how do you feel? Rohit, like,
and especially if it's, if it's an organization going through change, and already that is so uncomfortable for so many people. When you start off a conversation with that, it could be difficult, but that electricity that you're talking about is usually palpable. It's very palpable in certain groups. I just wonder if you can keep regenerating that, or does it have to be a collective of people who are able to do that, or can there be just one person who sparks or ignites that, and like everybody's then in that magic?
I think one person can create 100%. I was reading some online newsletter, I forget one of the many newsletter people that I subscribe to, but they were describing being on an airplane, and there was a couple that were going on vacation, and they were just like so happy to be going on vacation that they handed candy to everybody who passed them, and were like giving them compliments, and they were like, hey, welcome to the flight, we're going to Miami, and the person writing the newsletter was like, those two people changed the entire vibe of the plane. For, I don't know how much the candy costs, right? Like for not that much money.
Yeah.
And I guess they have to be willing to act a little unhinged, and they also have to be willing to kind of like bring the possibility of discomfort, like the possibility of like, okay, now I'm going to activate a space. So, there is something about consent there. Like, does everybody want to be in this space just because you bought a plane ticket? Maybe you don't want to be at their party, but also, it's just taking candy and giving a high five. It's not a big commitment. Yeah. And I do think at meetings where people have to be there, one person can absolutely change the meeting. And something, I mean, in the spaces that I control, it's been really empowering just to be like, I control this. You know, I think people are really quick to disempower themselves. Why? Well, people are like, oh, I can't do, you know, I can't start a meeting with asking everybody to think for 5 minutes about how they feel about change. I mean, what if at that meeting where they're going to say we're going to change some things, they ask everybody to sit for 3 minutes and think about the concept of change and how they feel about change before they start? Wouldn't that make the meeting so good? And who's going to stop that leader from doing that? Like there's, you know, but I think we often are like, oh, we can't make it fun. You know, what if somebody feels it's weird? It's like, well, they won't. They're probably going to be really grateful for the vibe shift. I think everyone is looking for fun. Everyone is looking for hope and play. And, you know, life's heavy, heavy, heavy.
Exactly. and it's so much easier to make things heavier, I feel. But you're right. What I'm hearing is it's a lot about play. It's a lot about the willingness to also be rejected. There could be people who will not want to be part of that. And you have to enter that knowing that there is going to be some sort of rejection and be kind of resilient to that. Because you, like by you, I mean just one who wants to create or hold space, has such clear intentions. Usually you do have intentions. Yeah, you do have intentions of what you want the outcome to be. And you want it to usually be from a joyous place, but it's very possible that not everybody's going to hop on that plane or that train of feeling that you're in. So yes, it has to be like a less studious approach, which is a challenge for me, by the way. I have a very studious mind now. But yeah, I think people are fearful of play, especially in organizations. Startups are different, though. I feel they're a little bit more playful.
Yeah, but also in this controlled way that you say, right? It's like, to me, it's playful in the way of like, take a break at our ping pong table, but not playful in the way of like, let's genuinely think about organizational structure in a way that feels organic, you know, or let's not think about, I don't know. I'm a hater. I'm the wrong person to be talking to.
No, but you can express your views for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I think a lot of that idea of play, it doesn't have the electrical feeling of actual, like the way that true play, I think, is transformative, because things could change. And I think sometimes the atmosphere of the startup is kind of controlled by like the market and the product and the kind of external factors. And so the play that's allowed is like, go down our slide into our ball pit. And it's like, well, that's fun, but that's not play. Because if you were really playing, then someone could change something. I don't know. I'm just riffing. But I do think also, like you said, Prat, that it's about kind of like invitational, you have to be really gentle and open, like you mentioned about being at the park and not being scary at the park. I mean, I think that also if leaders or facilitators want to try something, you know, they can be really gentle. They can also use gentle language, you know, something that I've started saying, I have no idea if it sounds really corny and cheesy to people, is like, I invite you. Sometimes I even say, I gently invite you. I feel like this is because I did too much yoga in my 20s. And now I'm like, my intention for this workshop, I gently invite all participants. And it's like, oh, it's so silly. But also, it's real, right? Instead of being like, okay, stand up, we're going to do... I mean, I can imagine a world, for example, in which someone was like, let's do a mandatory dance break. I'm going to put on a song and now everyone has to dance. I mean, that would be horrible. If I was in a meeting, if I were in a meeting and somebody said mandatory dance break and they put on like Happy by Pharrell, I would like walk out. I mean, I would be
It's happened too many times.
I would be so grumpy. Like, to me, that would be like the worst caricature of corporate culture, right? Where someone's like, we got to have fun. Let's make it fun. And it's like, well, being forced to dance with my coworkers is horrible. Like, that sounds horrible. Like, I would not like that. But then the question is like, but then how could I play? Yeah. You know, like, how could that be a playful moment? And how could it feel like an invitation rather than a command, you know? And so an invitation version of the same thing might be like, you know, what's the highest place in this room that you can reach? And whatever group of people gets to the highest spot in the room gets a candy bar. Then people are going to maybe be like touching each other's bodies, or, people are going to be moving in space differently, but they'll at least feel maybe like they're not forced to participate.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big, big, big thing. It's like not only anticipating resistance, but also welcoming that resistance, right? Like creating structures so that people can opt out, and otherwise it feels very ungenerous.
Yeah, organic structures, like let the collective create their own structures, like just in the case of the chairs, right? Where the participants just entered and started creating the structure of how they want to sit. Yeah, they create how they want to run the session in a way. But I just wonder, how do we break that pattern for people and get them into play? Yeah, how do we kind of motivate them? Because like you said, it's not really about, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not really about exercises. It's about being in a state of play. Yeah. Does that also involve allowing a bit of childishness to be part of it? Or let's not call it childishness, a sense of innocence to be part of it. But then these concepts are so foreign in a structured organization. Like how
or like vulnerability. I was thinking, and when we were thinking about holding space at the very beginning, I was, you said about bringing parts of yourself that are not, so nice, or bringing experiences that are not 100% positive, and that, part of holding space is about maybe kind of a more holistic approach. And I was thinking, when you were talking about vulnerability, really, that what that is vulnerability, right? Like that if space is being held, then I can be more vulnerable. And like you say, the corporate structure is not super supportive,
conducive of play, you think?
Or like the vulnerability, the possibility of failure, looking stupid, like all of those things are not corporate values generally, right? And so then I guess it's just about creating containers, or creating like scaffolded experiences so that people could feel safe to play or be more vulnerable, or like if someone said, tell me some personal news from your week, like there will be spaces in which I would feel sure, and there would be spaces in which I would be like, pass, and then the question is, like what are the boundaries, or what are the kind of like, I don't know, what are the elements or characteristics of those different spaces where someone will feel that they can be vulnerable.
And I do feel a lot of that also has to do with the physical space as well. And for me, food is very important, because my dad is a restaurateur. And honestly, they're basic shetty bar and restaurants, right? So a lot of the reasons why people do keep coming back there for generations, like they're third generation men who are now coming to those bars, to my dad's bars. And I always wondered why it is. Like the food's amazing, of course. So the food is one reason why they gather, but I feel another reason is also the way the tables are set up. I feel that there's, even though there's space, there's some accessibility to the next table. So it feels like, it's also Mumbai, so you feel cramped always. So maybe sometimes there's no option even, but still the way it is set up, the tables, not very fancy, but there's some proximity. You can hear other people's conversations. So you feel like you're part of something. And it's also the way my father makes his presence felt. And this is with a lot of family-run places.
Yes.
Like, Irani cafes. There'll be this one, older Iranian man who's not doing nothing, but he's there, and there's something very emanating about his presence, which makes the gathering even tighter. So I'm just wondering, because theater, what are the props kind of that can help in creating and making that space more safer, let's say?
Yeah, like you said, boundaries, like this feeling of closeness that you mentioned is really interesting. And another really memorable moment of Priya Parker's book to me is where she described if there's too few people for the space, you could literally just put painter's tape on the floor to make the space smaller and be
That's
like,
true.
everyone at this party has to stay inside this small square because it needs to be the right number of people for the right number of square feet. And a certain density feels like more electric than a certain density that feels dead. So yeah, you can push people into closer proximity. So that's one prop. But that's I also food. Think the other thing is food. Yeah. Or even, I love this example of your dad's restaurant so much. And I do think that it's also about like a steady vibe, and I think it's like an invitation. This story for me is an invitation to do less, right? I think sometimes when I'm in control of a space and I need to, hold a meeting or I need to teach a class, then I have a kind of a manic desire to like fill the air.
Tell me about it.
I'm like, I can't shut up. I will yap through, I'll be like, now I'll take a 5-minute silent free write and I will yap through it. And why do I do that? But I think it's just anxiety or being human or whatever. But it's like we loathe the vacuum, But I think the example of the like Irani cafe owner or your dad sitting there is such an invitation also for a facilitator to do less and hold space by actually opening space. I'm thinking of your blanket, like the thing that makes the blanket magic to me is that there's space on the blanket for another kid. So the kid sees the open space and fills it, And so if you had just kind of filled that, then it wouldn't work, right?
It wouldn't work. No, it doesn't. That's so true though. And especially about, I think as I grow older and have more life experiences, silences feel so much more important to me because and I also come from a very high context culture. So a lot of the time silences means more than actually words as well. So, but seeing the wisdom in just presence and the bodily presence doesn't have to be any sort of intellectual presence or presence through other sort of actions, just emanating that becomes so much more important. And yes, as facilitators and as leaders, since we want to listen more, then one must speak less, I guess. I don't know, maybe that's a bold statement to say, but a lot of the collective wisdom comes when we keep giving people space to speak. And then as a leader, when you create that environment through just not doing much, I think it has a lot of power to that, for sure. And I remember, so I used to work for this organization that created decision-making software for communities. And part of the communities that they were doing was for indigenous communities in North America. So what would happen was non-indigenous people would meet indigenous people and have meetings. So they're all sitting in a circle, they're all having meetings, and the non-indigenous person said, we've spoken for 2 hours, yet we haven't spoken anything. And there was this gentleman who hasn't spoken actually anything, and he was an indigenous person, and he said, it doesn't have to have consequences. And every conversation does not have to have the exact outcome that you came into the conversation with. Yeah. If there's any sort of friction or any sort of resolve that came from the process of it, even that's enough. I think we're just always so goal-oriented with any sort of interaction. If we just respect the process more, if you respect the presence more, it just makes so much more sense, for sure.
This is something I do really love about being in India, is I do get the sense that there's kind of like more willingness to treat the relationship as more important than any particular outcome. And so being in like a person-centered economy has been really, really transformative for me as an American, which is so transactional. Yes. So it's like coming from max transactional output-oriented culture to now being in Pune, I do feel like, it's nice to, not everything has to have an output, like you say. And as you're talking, I was thinking too, I think part of the reason that corporate structures might not want play is that play is useless. Like play has no use. It's not for anything except at the same time, like maybe they'll throw a ton of money into team building or, things that are that, right? It's like, oh, are soft skills useless? No. Is team building useless? No. Like, do you care about workplace happiness? Do you want to be a great place to work? You care about that, right? But then if you call it play or you acknowledge that it might be useless, like it might not have an outcome,
Yes.
then I think people get very cold feet, institution, like higher ups or whatever, then I think it becomes more like, well, we can't do that. Because I do think play is like radical in some disruptive way. But
the moment it's not quantifiable, like how do you quantify play? But do you think play has very long-term benefits that at one point we will be able to see what the outcome of having that process of play is? The thing is that I think there's only one organization that I know that had "we are playful with everything," it's not verbatim, as part of their values. And this was a manufacturing company. Yeah, so I could imagine this from a creative or an agency or service industry kind of an organization, but this was from a manufacturing company. So I do feel that there's a sense that is coming in that there's a shift in the world order. There's a shift in the way the next generation is going to function and is functioning. So I do feel that they will inculcate a little bit of a sense of play, but I think people just don't know how to at the moment, for sure.
Yeah. But I think about something that I learned when I was living in Germany, and this is through my husband, who went on a BMW manufacturing plant tour. He was so excited to go, and what he learned is that BMW has a contest for all BMW employees that if they can create a new invention or create like a manufacturing efficiency in their job, then they I forget what the prize is, but there's like a huge benefit, So if they can do some, jugaad or whatever, like if they can hack it somehow creatively, then the organization really, really celebrates that.
Yeah.
And I was surprised because I was like, this is a German prestige luxury manufacturing ultimately plant, like they're making luxury cars. So again, it's not like, oh, whoever gets the best ad slogan gets a bonus. I mean, it's thinking like on the production line, who can be creative. But I think obviously it benefits the organization to support worker creativity because worker creativity is ultimately productive, as you say. So I think that organizations of all kinds should be encouraging human creativity. And as you say, especially now that we have generative AI, like human creativity, not to be too nihilist, this is like a whole other 2-hour conversation. Like you invite somebody else on to talk about AI. I can't do everything. But, I will say, like human creativity feels like all we have left, like, oh, well, ChatGPT can do a lot of things, programming and writing and calculating and producing information, but it cannot set a vibe. It can't be creative. And I think that for that reason, it makes sense for all institutions, manufacturing institutions, educational institutions. Every institution should be thinking, okay, how can I incentivize creativity? And part of that is then incentivizing creative failure. Like, oh, how could we have people try stuff out? And if it doesn't work, then we'll do something else.
Creative failure. And when you said creativity can lead to productivity, it just created a little bit of friction within me, because I think we always associate creativity to be not productive. But I hope there's a sense of shift in the thinking that creativity can also lead to productivity, and that both can live in kind of harmony. Both ways of working and functioning can live in harmony, for sure.
Yeah, like if I want to be a better worker, then it befits me to be creative. Then I'm going to come up with better ways to do my task, right? Whether my task is like attaching one thing to another thing and I figure out a creative way to do that people hadn't thought of, or whether my task is how to run a room and I come up with a creative way to do that based on theater exercises, or whether I just feel, creativity is going to improve the status quo.
And talking about generative AI, I think that one of the most expensive pieces of artwork that was sold was actually an NFT. I don't know if you know what an NFT is.
Yeah, I do.
So it's like basically a digital form of artwork that's being bought by cryptocurrency or tokens. But there was such a democratization to it because everybody owned a piece of it. Imagine, like, for example, like owning a Mona Lisa, and everybody owns a Mona Lisa, and not just one person or just a museum. But I feel that it also, generative AI, yes, creates space for creativity as well, but in a different way. I think it definitely sharpens our insights and pushes the boundaries of what is creative. You know,
That's also true. That's also true. I mean, there's so many good, smart people working on this, you know, and something that I read is this incredible short story called Ghosts by this writer, Vohini Vara, who used ChatGPT, an early version of ChatGPT, to create a kind of a short story memoir, a kind of a eulogy for her sister who had died quite young. And it's profoundly moving. It's profoundly moving. And it's, you know, it's the kind of thing that makes me not a Luddite, right? Like sometimes I want to throw my phone in the sea and, you know, like walk away and, you know, change my name. But other times I'm like, no, we're here, you know? So we're here, it's here. ChatGPT can absolutely schedule my calendar. That would be very useful. But then what do I have, right? Then I'm like, okay, but then how much more precious is it to be able to facilitate a room? How much more precious is it to be able to look at a space and say, okay, here's how I can make this space more inclusive.
inviting.
And inviting.
Yeah.
And accessible. I mean, even sometimes, not to make it even more complicated, but physically accessible for people with different disabilities. I mean, different, learning styles, you know, like states of mental wellness. You know, how can we make things more accessible? That's a creative question, ultimately.
That's a creative question, really. I usually end my conversations with a question about the future, but I'm going to leave that aside. In the spirit of holding space, I want to know how in 2025 you will be holding space for yourself and maybe even for others, but more importantly, how are you holding space for yourself? Because when we talk about holding space, it's so much in the context of people around you. It's never within, at least for me. So I'm just wondering how you will be holding space for yourself in 2025.
Oh, it's so good. I'm so glad you asked that. Yeah, I mean, my number one New Year's resolution is that I will eat lunch every day. And so I am holding lunchtime. And it seems silly because if anyone is watching this and is thinking, I skip lunch, I have never skipped lunch. I'm not a lunch skipper. I love to eat. I'm a food studies researcher. You know, I am such an enthusiastic eater. I love to eat. And what has been happening is that I've been teaching in the middle of the day, and then I'm holding space for students after class, because often these intense conversations, you know, about gender, about climate catastrophe, about violence, you know, these are like heavy topics. So they bleed out into the afternoon. And then by the time I sit at my desk, it's 3:15 and I'm like, well, I'm not hungry, you know, or I look at the leftovers that I brought from home and I'm like, ugh, you know, room temperature dal chowel, like, no, not happening. So, you know, I think that my invitation to myself to have lunch is also a way of holding space for myself, because I do think that, I don't know, it's just like, as women, but like for real, as women, it's really easy to think about holding space as a nurturing, generous act for a broader community, like you say. And so, yeah, my act of holding space is that I'm going to leave class on time and I'm going to go to my office and I'm going to eat as nice a lunch as I can. But it's so funny and specific because even then, my husband was like, well, why don't you go to the dining hall and you can invite all the students to have lunch with you and then you can eat lunch with them. And I was like, no.
The point is that I want something for myself.
Even if I eat a cup of like Maggie, fancy Korean Maggie, nongshim noodles. Even if I'm eating nongshim noodles at my desk, like that is space that I'm holding for myself. And that's, I think, it's really gendered. Like, it's really hard to be boundaried about that, I think. So I'm really, this is a lovely final question.
Yeah. And
how are you holding space for yourself?
Yeah. I think for me, it has been emotional boundaries for sure. Also, I'm away from home, so that helps me much more to create that emotional boundaries for me. And I think in an Indian context, it's so easy for our lives to be like a Venn diagram with our families, And for me, it's to teach myself that you can still show love and be part of a community and not be in each other's lives constantly. So I think for me, it's definitely creating that emotional space for myself to feel what I want in my solitude. Yeah. Because I think it's not only gendered, but it's also so cultural. Yeah, solitude is only meant for saints and monks in this country, right? It's when you want to reach that sense of nirvana. Otherwise, you are for people and part of them. And that's how your life is often defined. And yeah, I've often been critiqued about me coming from a very Western thought perspective. I don't think that's Western anymore. It's a preference at the moment. So yes, it's creating the emotional boundaries for sure.
Yeah, right. I mean, it ties it back. Even this idea of holding space, it's kind of a very Western cliche. I think of like the Bombay local or whatever. It's like, what space, like even space itself on a basic level, whether it's emotional space or brain space or time space, like maybe, like it's such a luxury that we don't have really in India. I mean, like,
and I just feel like as a collective, we've gone through so much, right? In the last year, in the past, I don't know, 4 years, it feels like everyone's just going through a lot. So it just became imperative that I have a conversation about this, not only about how we hold space for others, but even for ourselves. Otherwise, everyone's going crazy. And they will if
the
they don't.
vibes are bad. That's why I'm like, one person can absolutely shift the vibe because I don't know. If there's one thing that I've become more and more sure of, it's like the vibes are bad. So we have to start at least with us. Like we have to at least, create a sense of play or a sense of possibility or a sense of like, I'm going to shift the vibe. Like,
or come with that intention.
I'm going to bring lightness. I'm going to create a sense that it's not going to be so stiff and heavy. But it is an act of will. And you have to risk looking silly.
Maybe this is my new resolution, to look silly in the next coming year. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Lily, and such a beautiful conversation. I think I learned so much today.
Oh,
I did.
Shocker. I was going to give a whole mini lecture on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. Do you know this essay? By Walter Benjamin, like 20th century philosopher. And he wrote this wonderful essay that's so good that I recommend to all listeners, called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And when you said you can't own the Mona Lisa, I was like, well, yeah, but you can own a Mona Lisa postcard or a Mona Lisa magnet or a Mona Lisa t-shirt or a Mona Lisa mouse pad. I mean, not that we have mouse pads anymore, but you could have like a Mona Lisa, whatever you wanted, right? But that's not owning the Mona Lisa because the Mona Lisa has a vibe. He says aura is the word that he uses. I'm obsessed with vibes. I'm like, I know it's maybe old, like cringe slang, but I just like, I have performance, like I live on vibes. And so it's like the Mona Lisa has an aura that those postcards don't have. And I think that's the whole thing about the NFTs and why to me, I have so much hesitancy about the digital as a like liberatory, answer for our problems is because like, well, that NFT doesn't have an aura. Everybody gets to own that NFT, which is cool, which is democratic. There's accessibility, but at the cost of this aura, like at the cost of this like magnetism that to me is like the best part of being alive. I don't know.
That can only come when you commune together and are actually creating virtual physical spaces for people.
Yeah, which actually only happens in a real space. maybe not, it's not like you can't have a transformative experience online, obviously, but I think there is something that I learned from performance about like eye contact, about bodies in a room. And I think that is what I miss.
Yeah. Well, I hope that changes. I hope we are able to create the vibes for people in all kind of contexts. But thank you. Thank you so much, Lily. And I hope to see you again for a different conversation.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to kick off season 3.
Thank you so much.